Picture this. You wake up, your eyes dart around the room, taking in all the familiar shadows of your bedroom. But as you tell your arm to reach over and click on the lamp, nothing happens. You try to speak, to call out for help, but your jaw, it's locked solid. And then you feel it. This heavy, crushing pressure pushing down right on the center of your chest. It's literally as if all the oxygen is being slowly, deliberately forced out of your lungs. Because right along with this sudden absolute paralysis comes the overwhelming, terrifying sensation that you are not alone. And I mean, sufferers of this condition frequently report incredibly vivid sensory hallucinations. We're talking buzzing, hissing noises, electric tingles shooting all through the body, and the distinctly horrifying sight of shadow people, these dark, menacing figures just lurking over in the corner of the room. Look, if you've ever endured this, I want to validate you right here, right now. The sheer terror you experienced is incredibly real, and it is absolutely terrifying.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unmasking the demon and exploring this terrifying global mystery. We are pulling back the curtain on the monsters in our bedrooms, and we're going to use modern neurobiology to explain exactly what is going on inside the brain when this waking nightmare strikes. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the midnight paralysis, we need to step away from all the spooky, supernatural elements for just a second and look at the clinical reality of what is actually happening to our bodies in the middle of the night. So, clinically speaking, this is known as isolated sleep paralysis, or ISP. It's a state that happens right at the boundary of sleep, either right as you're falling asleep or just as you're waking up. The bizarre defining contrast here is that your mind, your sensorium, is completely conscious and alert. You are totally awake in there, but your body remains in a complete lockdown state of atonia, which basically just means muscle paralysis. You are literally trapped inside your own physical shell.
Now, if you've ever felt this, you probably woke up terrified that you were losing your mind. But you know what? The statistics tell a completely different story. Up to half the population, 50%, will experience this physiological glitch at least once in their lifetime. Around 45% have occasional episodes, and a smaller fraction, about 5%, deal with this on a regular recurring basis. It's incredibly common, affects men and women equally, and fundamentally, it's a biological event, not a paranormal one.
So what exactly is the underlying biological mechanism causing all this chaos? Well, it's fundamentally a glitch in REM sleep. And to really grasp that, we have to look at the architecture of our sleep cycle, and specifically what goes totally wrong during REM sleep.
And this brilliantly illustrates how sleep paralysis is basically just a dysfunctional overlap of two highly distinct physiological states. In your normal waking state, you're conscious, right? Your sensory input is fully active. But in your REM state, you're experiencing vivid dreaming. And crucially, your brain triggers complete muscle atonia. It temporarily paralyzes your voluntary muscles so you don't physically act out your dreams in bed. Sleep paralysis happens when these two states literally crash into each other.
At a chemical level, it's like the neural functions regulating your sleep stages get completely out of whack. The cholinergic neuropopulations, think of them as the cellular on switches that keep the brain locked in a sleep state, they become hyperactivated. Meanwhile, the serotonergic off populations, which are supposed to wake your body up completely, are underactivated. They simply can't overcome those sleep signals. So the result? Your brain holds on to the muscle paralysis of REM sleep even as your consciousness completely boots up.
But hold on, not only explains the paralysis, right? It doesn't explain the demons or the sheer undeniable panic. For that, we have to look at your midbrain's emergency response, your threat vigilance system. When you wake up completely paralyzed, your brain instantly recognizes that you are sitting ducks. You are entirely vulnerable to attack. This instantly triggers a massive, hypervigilant panic response, pushing your fear way, way above the level of just a normal bad dream.
And then add to that the way we naturally breathe during REM sleep. REM breathing is shallow and rapid. It often involves slight airway blockages and hypercapnia, which is basically just a fancy medical word for a buildup of carbon dioxide in the blood. When your conscious mind wakes up during an episode, it naturally tries to take a deep, voluntary breath to get some oxygen, but because those voluntary muscles are paralyzed, it fails.
So the crucial point is this: your brain is fully awake, it senses that it cannot breathe, and it feels entirely paralyzed. In a desperate split-second attempt to make sense of this horrifying physical data, your hypervigilant midbrain creates an endogenous hallucination. It literally invents an explanation: a demon sitting on your chest, an intruder choking you. This creates a terrifying feedback loop where your very real fear of suffocation actually causes you to struggle more, which only makes the subjective experience of the attack feel so much worse.
Let's move to and see how this builds across human history, because this isn't just a modern clinical issue. We are talking about monsters across global cultures. Long before we had modern polysomnography and neurobiology, our ancestors were experiencing this exact same terrifying chemical glitch, and they had to explain it using literally the only cultural tools they had available: folklore, myth, and religion.
It is absolutely fascinating how wildly different cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, independently named and feared the exact same physiological event. I mean, look at this. In Newfoundland, this is known as the old hag attacking the sleeper. Over in Japan, it's kind of shibari, where people believe a childlike spirit sits right on the victim's chest. In Bengal, it's a supernatural entity called boba that strangles you in your sleep. And in Egypt, the paralysis is widely attributed to malevolent, spirit-like creatures known as the jinn.
And what's truly mind-blowing here is that the way a culture views this phenomenon actually changes how people physically experience it. Studies show that sleep paralysis is 3 times more common in Egypt than it is in Denmark. Why? Well, in Denmark, lacking these supernatural myths, it's mostly viewed as a weird, harmless physiological quirk. But in Egypt, where elaborate beliefs about the jinn persist, that cultural filter creates a deeply conditioned fear. That fear actually worsens the physiological experience, creating much more prolonged episodes and driving up the overall rates of the condition. It's a real-world, self-fulfilling prophecy. This biological misfire has profoundly influenced global literature, too. Herman Melville described a classic, absolutely terrifying sleep paralysis episode in his 1851 novel Moby Dick. And J.M. Barrie, the beloved author of Peter Pan, explicitly stated that in his boyhood, it was a sheet that tried to choke me in the night. Actually, his well-documented personal experiences with this paralysis and those strange floating sensations that often accompany it deeply influenced the dreamlike and sometimes hostile flying sequences in the Peter Pan stories we all know today.
So, how do we go about taking back the night? Well, once we strip away the centuries of folklore and finally recognize this as a mechanical, neurological event, we can start looking at actionable medical prevention and treatment. Because the good news is, you don't have to just suffer through this.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that, sure, we know insomnia, stress, and erratic schedules trigger these episodes because they fragment your normal REM sleep cycle. But, surprisingly, simply sleeping in the supine position, flat on your back, is a massively prominent instigator. Why on earth would that matter? Because gravity pulls down on your soft palate, making it collapse and physically obstruct the airway. This tiny blockage forces microarousals in the brain, causing your REM and waking states to literally crash into each other.
Now, when basic sleep hygiene and simply rolling onto your side just isn't cutting it, doctors often turn to cognitive behavioral therapy for isolated sleep paralysis. This whole approach is all about mentally restructuring the panic. By deeply understanding the science we just covered, that's the psychoeducation phase, sufferers learn that the paralysis is strictly temporary and the demons are simply mid-brain inventions. They practice deep relaxation and episode disruption techniques during the day, so when that intense hypervigilance kicks in at night, they can actively disrupt the panic loop, remind themselves that they are completely safe, and just calmly ride out the glitch.
Which leaves us with a truly paradigm-shifting realization. If this one simple clash of neurotransmitters can generate such universally vivid, terrifying hallucinations of intruders, incubi, and shadow people, how many of our recorded historical accounts of ghosts, demonic possessions, and even modern alien abductions were never paranormal at all? How much of our vast global supernatural history is simply the result of a deeply misunderstood but utterly fascinating glitch in the human mind? Just something to think about the next time you turn off the lights.